Pledge of Allegiance. Kate, could we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Gary Cunningham.
Here.
Marie McFarland.
Here.
Josh Brainerd.
Here.
Steve Griffiths. Miles Schlesinger.
Here.
Sean Keir is absent. And Patty Crowan.
Here. Lindsay, any changes to the agenda or revisions?
We will need to, under agenda item number 10, future agenda items, next meetings, we'll need to discuss who can sit in as a chair for some of those. No other adjustments or changes.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. We have the July 2nd regular meeting Planning Commission minutes. I assume you've all had a chance to take a look at them. Can I have a motion to accept?
Move to accept the minutes for the July
Second.
2nd meeting.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are passed. No final orders, resolutions, or written communications, but we have 3 public hearings. So it is now 6:02. The public hearing for file ZOA 2019-04 is now open. This is a public hearing and concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17, zoning in Chapter 17.08 under definitions, revising the definitional time limitation for emergency shelters and expanding the emergency communication and warning facilities definition. The ordinance also amends Chapter 17.80 provisions applying to special uses, Section 17.80.070 essential emergency communications and warning facilities to add other similar emergency preparation facilities such as emergency caches to the scope of the use, and amends zoning districts to reflect the revised definitions and reflect the use as permitted. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation, or they may take other action. The Commission needs to take a few moments to cover preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Okay, seeing none. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions from the Planning Commission. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me as the chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any of those questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up sheet at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to Kate. Will the staff please present the report?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Anne Marie Skinner. I'm the Senior Planner for the City of Lincoln City Planning and Community Development Department. This hearing is for case file ZOA 2019-04, Emergency Preparation Facilities. City Council requested the Planning Commission to consider a zoning code amendment to authorize emergency caches as part of the allowed essential emergency communications and warning facilities. During the public hearing on temporary uses for places of worship in June 2019, it was also identified that minor edits were necessary to the definition of emergency shelter under Title 17 as well. And these edits are included in this draft ordinance. So this ordinance has three separate and distinct parts. The essential emergency communications and warning facilities will have its definition modified. The essential emergency communications and warning facilities will be included as an outright permitted use in all zoning districts, except open space. And there will be a definition modification only to emergency shelters. It's important to note that both are separate and distinct uses with completely different definitions and requirements, and one has nothing to do with the other. So even though they're included in this in the same ordinance amendment, neither one relies on the other or has anything to do with the other, and I will get more, I will give you more detail on that. So for some background on the emergency caches, this zoning code amendment is proposed to allow the necessary emergency caches to be located in strategic locations throughout the city. Part of the amendment, which is not included in the draft ordinance, but which probably should be, is a definition for emergency cache. So prior to this hearing, staff developed the definition that you see before you on the screen. That emergency cache is defined as a publicly owned metal shipping container or similar public facility that is owned, placed, and maintained by the city, county, special district, or state government, and that contains basic survival items such as water, food, and basic medical supplies to sustain individuals for a limited period of time until authorities are able to respond to the emergency. So staff is proposing that this definition also be added to Chapter 17.08 as a standalone definition for emergency cache. Again, the primary purpose of the ordinance amendment is to locate the container that will hold basic survival items that will sustain individuals for a limited period of time until authorities are able to stabilize the situation. The caches will be placed in strategic locations throughout the city, and they will include items such as water, water pumps, tents, food bars, and basic medical supplies. Specifically, information that I was given, 4 caches will contain a number of items, including 1,500 disposable drinking cups, 2 water pumps, 1,250 emergency blankets, rain ponchos, hand warmers, food bars, water straws, dust mask, etc. One container will be limited to 200 cots, blankets, and care kits, and 1 medical trauma kit, And then there are already some containers located in Lincoln City, and I will let Mr. Murphy address that in further detail. Mr. Murphy has also identified some potential locations for the caches, and I will let him address those in more detail, but essentially they are all in either the residential single-family zone, park, or general commercial, which in this zoning amendment would allow all of those, would allow that use in all the zones except open space. So the draft ordinance for the emergency, essential emergency communications portion expands the definition for essential emergency communications and warning facilities to include early warning and associated emergency facilities. The associated emergency facilities includes the emergency caches. And then the definition, which I previously stated, you can see on the screen for the emergency cache. This will be an outright permitted use in all zoning districts except open space. And it's important to note that this particular use is not subject to requirements, guidelines, or standards of 17.52.240, which is site plan review, or Chapter 17.74, which is commercial design standards, or any other site plan or design standards, guidelines, or requirements. And then very briefly, because this is simply a definition modification for emergency shelter, current definition of emergency shelter means a facility consisting of dwelling units, dormitories, and or yurts, which provides necessary counseling services for 20 or fewer homeless persons for a period not to exceed 60 days per person, and which includes associated cooking and sanitation facilities necessary to accommodate the maximum occupancy of the facility. These are only allowed in limited zones. It's allowed in the RC, recreation commercial, the GC, which is general commercial, and the PI, or planned industrial zoning districts. And it is a conditional use in those zones. It's also allowed as part of a large-scale mixed-use planned unit development that would consist of 100 acres or more with direct access to an arterial, and 35% gross area is open space. So as you can see, it's very limited throughout the city. The draft modification will be to increase the number to 50 or fewer homeless persons, and to increase the period not to exceed 180 days. Ordinance 2019-21 allows the temporary sheltering of up to 50 persons in the general commercial zone. And so this modification to the definition will make the maximum consistent with what we're allowing for the warming shelter for as an accessory use for places of worship. And so that will provide consistency, and then by expanding the number of days, that will be in line with the services that the homeless shelters have indicated to us is an appropriate length of time to benefit the homeless persons. And staff's available for questions. Staff recommends, after Mr. Murphy has spoken, that the Planning Commission open the public hearing and receive testimony, and then upon closure of the public hearing, deliberate and make a recommendation to City Council concerning this ordinance.
All right, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ken Murphy. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for the City of Lincoln City. Let me first address the containers that were there when I got here. There is 2 located at Taft High School and 1 located at Christus Park for Ocean Lake Elementary. Those are primarily filled with a lot of the same things that I would fill them with: tents, water, medical supplies, and some food items. The arrangement we have is those are for the children of our community first. If they are not in session at night or the summertime, then we have access to those caches. The other cache that is located is up on Northeast Port Lane right next to the big 4.2 or 3 million gallon water tank. It's inside the fence there, and it has some very basic supplies in it. So those are already there. The ones in the school have been there about 5 years. The one on Northeast Port Lane by the water tank has been there a couple years. So taking a look when I came inside the city, and truly unscientific and more of a gut feeling and based on elevation, I looked at the city where we might have the most issues with an earthquake and tsunami. I also need to keep in mind that these are there for any type of disaster, no matter how small or how large. So in my non-scientific estimation, I looked at Cutler City as an area very close to sea level and not much elevation to the east. There is elevation, but you have to have mountain climbing equipment practically to get up it. So there's really no good area at this point in time. There is one little tsunami evacuation area there that you can go up on a piece of flat ground, and maybe on a good day 50 people could be there, and that's okay. So I've taken a look, and for the time being, until another solution presents itself, I'm going to recommend that we put a cache just inside the water treatment facility on Northeast 54th Street or Southeast Street there. And that gives some elevation and a chance for people to get to that area versus trying to go up the hill. It's almost impassable. The second one is located at the St. Clair Fire Station. Primarily looking at the Taft area there. Their elevation is adequate, and that will be behind the fire station for that particular location. The third one is just outside our building here. There's a piece of city property between the parking lot on top of McKay's grocery store and Les Schwab. And there's a nice little nestle of trees there that would fit a container very well, and also to support this area of people that may need assistance during a disaster. The other one that would hold emergency supplies is inside the gate near the Knoll hiking trail off of Northeast Solacey Drive and Northeast Port Drive. If you come back from the gate about 10-15 feet, there's almost a perfect spot there to locate a container, and thanks to some individuals in Rhodes End, they've talked to the people that own some land and a home right across from it, and they would be more than happy to have it there and kind of keep an eye on it. The last one is going to be located in or near the community center, preferably near Christus Park, and that is going to hold sheltering supplies. Lincoln City Community Center will be used as a sheltering area, and so we will have cots, blankets, chairs, comfort kits, and that type of thing. The quantities that Anne Marie mentioned, there's no good science. You know that during tourist season our numbers tremendously change on a daily basis. Even in the winter, we have not necessarily tourists, we have a tremendous amount of traffic from the valley and other communities coming through our city, coming to work here. So, and the containers are 20-foot shipping containers, 10 feet wide, and you can only get so much in them. I have chosen to be water one of the most precious things to put in them. So we will have a large supply of water in the containers, and then we will have some tents, and we'll have some other basic survival items that Anne Marie mentioned. I've only chosen at this point in time to put food bars in them because I worry they're 2,400 calorie each food bars. They will sustain you. You may not be comfortable, but you will be sustained. I worry about the moisture and how things react. They will be stored in plastic tubs, but I still worry about anything, especially food items, that will be access to the elements. The water, for your information, there are chemicals available today that the water will be good for 5 years before we have to change it out each time. So those are the locations. I am looking now at future locations for more caches. I'm doing my research, but right now that's what we have at the time that I am proposing to locate here in the community.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Elevation on these containers, are they all high enough up that they're safe from that big wind?
Depends, Commissioner, it depends on who you talk to. Most of them, my goal is to be at least 70 to 100 feet high, and all of them meet that requirement right now. What I don't know, in all honesty, is during an earthquake, you never know how the land is going to shift. You know, nobody will ever commit to a scientific, yes, exactly what's going to happen. We know the land could sink, it can go up, it can shift around in liquefaction, but I think that the containers are high enough that they would survive and still be usable in the elevation.
Next question is
Yes, sir.
the security on these. I know you have to have some security, but
They do have locks. Locks are cuttable, but I've considered putting some cameras out to kind of keep an eye on them. But right now I have very high steel weatherproof locks. They all have the same key so that we have access. So the keys will be in the police department, the fire department, the community emergency response team members, and they're all keyed identical. Because otherwise you'll have a nightmare trying to get the right key to the right container. So they're locked that way, and we will check them frequently and hopefully do some camera work to keep an eye on them. But I can't outwit the people that want to get in them. Yes, sir.
Has there been a lot of vandalism? Because I've seen the one at the community center, I think, but I've never seen anyone go near it.
To the best of my knowledge, Commissioner, I have not seen or heard of any actual vandalism.
Quick question,
Steve?
Ken.
Sorry, we're going to go by recognition, if you don't mind, so go ahead.
Oh,
Steve.
I wanted to thank you for proposing that the definition of emergency cash be included. I think that's valuable to have it in this document. And I just have a question. Any perhaps future thought to encouraging private developers, say of a PUD, to include an emergency cache for their clients if it can be located in an area that's 70 or 100 feet above sea level and is not in the tsunami zone?
Commissioner, I have not. I have not talked to gas company, electric company, telephone companies, that type of, to see. I do know, I don't know the details. I know Northwest Natural does have some supplies stored.
Well, actually, I was thinking of a planned unit development, like for a vacation rental development, that might want to include a cache on their grounds for their clients. during
Yeah.
an emergency.
Again, I have not gone down that path and talking to vacation rentals or even hotels, motels, and that type of thing.
Josh?
I guess my question, Ken, is are we locked into the industrial commercial zones to place these caches by code? I mean, Anne Marie.
Commissioner, no. And that's the purpose of this amendment.
So we could put them in residential zones from the.
They're allowed in every zone in the city except open space.
Except open space. Gotcha. That's very good. Have we, and Ken, this is a question for you, has anyone approached the city, or do we have any plans for putting these in residential zones? And I guess I'm just thinking along the lines of maximizing the livability of these items, because really protecting these caches is as important as having them out there. And I know that's something you're considering, but will this amendment help us unlock those areas to maybe get some better elevations?
Yeah, Commissioner, no doubt, this amendment is, to me, a great adjustment in how the city thinks, allowing us to put these caches. I have been approached by the Indian Shores Homeowner Association, and we've talked about them having a cache for their homeowners association on their property. And so I'm going to meet with the Nelscott Homeowners Association here not too distant future, and we will have that same discussion. And I've met with Rhodes End, and that somewhat led me to this location on Northeast Solacey Drive and Port Drive, to really facilitate as close as possible to serve the most people. So I think I'm very open to these, and of course, as long as the money continues to flow and the city supports it, and I think we will be in good shape. And I do want to mention, since I talked about food not really being in these containers, we haven't forgot that. Thanks to Lyle Bradley, your Public Works Director, and I've been chipping in since I came to work here. We have many thousands of meals stored at the Public Works Department here in the city. The challenge, of course, will be is getting it to the people that need it, but at least we have it.
Excellent.
Marie?
Along with that, on the meals and the bars, is there a rotation plan to be able to possibly get some of these spread out, maybe groups purchase them, and to take that money and refurbish where you have fresher?
Yes, part of this whole plan that I have is really to most of it, unless it is destroyed by water, should be good forever, except for the food bars. They have a shelf life, actually quite a long time. But there is a plan to rotate it. There's also a plan where we go in and inspect it. That's part in working with the community emergency response team that we have here in North Lincoln County, to go in and, look at the security, look at the items, make sure everything is in good working order.
And also, how many additional containers are you looking at?
Right now, 2 additional ones. I have some money in the 2019-2020 budget the city provided to me. So I'm looking at 2 right now, addition to what we proposed here into the future, and then we'll keep looking. And one, I'm hoping that I'll just wake up one day and Cutler City will give me an answer. The hill will move or something.
Could happen.
I don't know what that answer is. Yeah.
Of course, that's when you'll
But
need the cash.
eventually we will figure it out, because the people that live there and visit there, deserve the support also. And right now I plan on adding 2 more locations yet to be determined.
I have a question. Since this is opening this up to all the zoning areas in the city, and it stated on page 13 of our packet that it's not required to comply with things like lot size, landscaping, yard requirements. I'm hoping there's some sensitivity to neighborhoods and what these look like and how they're maintained, particularly the land around them, weeds and things like that, and also view sheds. So I'm encouraged that the folks up at the Knoll, entrance are willing to watch over it. I would hope that anybody else that buys that house after they leave would do the same thing. But I'm just a little bit concerned about being sensitive to the way these look in residential neighborhoods. So
Chair, we've talked about that, you know, and when I worked with David Jamison and up there in Northeast Port Drive and Solace, I told him and the neighbors, if you want us to paint these, we will. I'll be the first to admit they are not pretty. They're kind of a desert camouflage, dirty yellow. But I'm willing to paint them. Not sure I'll draw trees on. I'm not very good at drawing, but we are sensitive to that. And the locations, as you can see, with the exception of a couple here, are somewhat out of the way of the public eye. And but we are sensitive to that fact.
Any landscaping around them or anything?
I have not planned on any at this point in time.
Okay.
I was going to ask about how much do we have invested in each of these units once they're loaded up and ready to...
Commissioner, I don't have an exact answer. I'll get you one. I'm going to guess it's about $4,000 in each one of them. That includes the cost of the container, the shipping of the container to get it here, and then the goods that go in it.
It's not a bad price for...
Not really.
What we might need it
Actually,
for.
the container and shipping the container, they come from Portland. That's probably the most expensive piece. They're about $1,400 per container and about $800 to ship here from Portland. They're called one-way containers, and the reason they call them that is because they've been used one way across the ocean, and they're really pretty nice looking and good shape, other than the color choice is not my first choice.
Do you have funding for security around them? Have you budgeted for that?
Not that specific, but I have funding that can handle that issue. Yes, sir.
I would hope that because of the minimal costs involved in these things, that we would get the rotation in the food supply down really good, and get as many as, I mean, there's 7,000, whatever, 8,000 people here at any point in time for sure.
Right.
And you know, the math to make it work for that 7 to 10 day period that we have nothing.
Commissioner, that's my ultimate goal. I will be honest with you, I am not sure one container is capable of taking care of our population in each location. And I think that's something that we're going to have to look at. I can tell you for sure during the height of any time we have tourists in town and our population grows, they're just probably not capable at that point in time, you know, of dealing with the potentially of 10, 20, 30,000 people.
Do you know if there's any efforts by the management companies of the VRDs to notify people in those VRDs of the potential risk and hazard, and perhaps providing them with something?
Chair, I've talked to a couple. I will tell you, in my opinion, they are cautious at best about even mentioning the words. I've talked to them about putting up a kind of a small version of a tsunami evacuation map and some instructions. You know, talk to them a little bit about having some supplies there for their customers, but the conversations have been less than acceptable with these people.
So the question then for the residents is, how many people do we need to prepare for?
Well, from my experience, Chair, in my business, you prepare for the max plus 10%. You know, in my thinking in our city, I plan for the height of tourism season. A sunny, warm day, and let's say 30 to 40,000 people are passing through or actually located in Lincoln City. And that's what I'm looking at. Anything less than that, I think we can deal with.
So that, just as a hypothetical then, for the, as my understanding then, there's 2 caches that would be accessible from the 2 different portions of Rhodes End, one going up Salicy and the other at Port. So are you planning to have adequate supplies in those for the maximum number of tourists in the 200 VRDs in Rhodes End?
There's not enough room for caches. We would actually have to locate more to be able to handle, and I think I can safely say that that is true in any of the locations throughout the city.
Yeah.
One 20-foot long by 10-foot wide container just will not handle the potential maximum numbers of people that are in our community.
Okay. Other questions about the caches?
Yes. How many, if you were totally prepared for 40,000 people, how many boxes would you need?
Let me get back to you on that, Commissioner. I don't know. But I can get you an answer. Let's just say a whole lot more than what we have here tonight in our proposal. You know, if you're talking containers that can hold things that don't mold or rot from our weather that we have here on the coast, you're talking buildings or facilities that are temperature controlled, climate controlled. It becomes very expensive and some very large type of facilities. So I'll get you a definitive answer, but it's a lot of, if we did containers, it's a lot. And I worry that we just don't necessarily have the space in some of these areas to put that many containers, but I might be wrong. But I'll get you a definitive answer.
Well, this is a good start.
It is.
I would appreciate it if you would also sort of look at placing emergency supplies in other locations. For example, you said the community center was going to be utilized as a sheltering area. I would think that having supplies right there might be a reasonable thing to do. And likewise, other locations that you might be able to place things that don't have to have a separate cache.
Correct. I have looked at that, Chair, in cooperation with the American Red Cross. They have quite a few of the churches and facilities here in town listed as shelters, and so we've talked about that and how we can supplement that with the churches, you know, and having supplies.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on the caches?
Just one really quick
Section.
one.
Yeah.
Our new police station, will it be able to host any of these caches at all in the elevation there, or?
Commissioner, I don't think there's enough space there. And I, in all honesty, am not sure I would want a lot of people running around the police station in an emergency. I actually looked at the area, and maybe, but I would rather try and locate something a little bit away from the police station, allowing free access, you know, so that the law enforcement community can do their job, and that fire station that's right next to the police department is not interrupted.
Okay. You have one more on the cache?
Yeah, one more on the cache.
Okay.
I would suggest you may find those churches that are housing people might be also willing to allow a cache on their property in many cases. A lot of times we have parking facilities that are larger than our necessity, and it might be a good location to look at.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, there are some other sections to this this particular topic. One of them has to do with adding a word early in front of warning, and I'm just curious, what are you contemplating different warning that would need the word early in front of it?
Chair, you know, part of my job is to do as early as possible. Will that happen? Don't know. Clearly, in an earthquake scenario with a Cascadia earthquake, your early warning is the ground shaking. Other items that may affect our community, I think we have a possibility if I, the city manager, and other people in the chain of command have access to. There are so many systems out there that can provide you early warning or advanced knowledge of something that may be coming. So I think it is possible to have early warning. Earthquake, probably not. Now, obviously, if you have an earthquake, I think most people are experienced with the Japanese earthquake. We had, I think, 8 hours to know about the tsunami. Fortunately, it was very small, but it did do damage on the Oregon coast. So we do have that early warning available to us.
Okay. And just a question for you, Anne Marie. On the emergency shelter, the language changes. Is that the language that the city council came up with? I mean, I know we talked about this emergency shelter issue, and we provided some information to the city council, and then the city council.
Well, if I may, unfortunately, Anne Marie was not at the city
Oh.
council meeting that was referencing this. However, there was direction from the council to move forward with making these amendments because we had other ordinances that we were about to send to DLCD. This was something that we were able to incorporate into this one.
The number changes, did that come
Yes.
from city
The
council?
the 50 maximum is from the city council, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about other sections of this one? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Okay, now is the time for public comment and testimony. Kate, did we have any sign-ins? No? Okay, is there anybody in the audience that wants to speak on this topic? No? Okay. And I see no representatives of public agencies, so I'm going to assume they don't want to speak. So if there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Miles seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. What is the pleasure of the commission?
I move that we make a recommendation to the city council to approve these changes with the definition of emergency cash included.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. A final recommendation will be prepared for our consideration at the next meeting. The City Council will hold a public hearing on this matter on Monday, August 12th at 6 p.m. Okay, one down. Next up. Okay, it's now 6:43 p.m. The public hearing for file ZOA 2019-05 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to adopt the required new flood insurance rate maps. In addition to adopting the maps, the proposed ordinance would amend Title 15, Buildings and Construction, Chapter 15.16, Flood Damage Prevention, to strengthen development standards in the 100-year floodplain. The proposed amendments include definition changes and wording to make the code more congruent with the state's model code. These amendments are not believed to be land use regulations, as they do not implement the City of Lincoln City Comprehensive Plan. However, notice and public hearing are provided in the event these amendments are determined to be land use regulations. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Okay. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of the hearing. So again, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report, respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, direct them to me as the chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. And if we do have questions, your time responding will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-in sheet at the entrance. Speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to Kate. Staff, please present your report. Weston.
My name is Weston Fritz. I'm assistant planner for the city of Lincoln City. Let me know if you're having trouble hearing me or have any questions. So this presentation is building off the work session that we had on June 4th. Some of the slides are pretty similar. I tried to make it a little bit shorter tonight as just to go over the main concepts and the key points. So, the summary: staff is presenting amendments to Chapter 15.16 of the Lincoln City Municipal Code, including adoption of the new flood insurance rate maps as required by the National Flood Insurance Program. A work study with the Planning Commission occurred on June 4th, 2019, and the Commission was in support of staff recommendations. The LCD was notified on June 11, 2019 of the proposed amendments. Public hearing notice was mailed on June 25th, and a notice was published on July 3rd. Staff will present a summary of these proposed amendments. So the intent of the code amendments that are proposed: to lower flood insurance premiums for homeowners, adopt the new flood insurance rate maps as required by FEMA, to make structural and language changes to strengthen enforceability and communication of the ordinance recommended by staff, and to strengthen development standards in the identified special flood hazard areas also recommended by staff. So, okay. One of the ways that you can lower flood insurance premiums is by joining the community rating system, which is action item number 8 on Lincoln City's natural hazard mitigation plan. That's our portion of the adopted countywide natural hazards mitigation plan. And essentially, CRS is a rating system that allows communities to get discounts on their flood insurance through a point system based on development standards that you have in your community and different outreach activities that you do. So usually the stricter the development standards, the less likely that you're going to incur damage in a disaster situation, and the better discounts that you can get. So if you look at the table here, you can see, if you get up to 500 to 999 points, you can get up to 5 to 10% is what our goal would be for joining that community rating system. And that applies to all insurance premiums that are for people. That applies to all insurance premiums that people have in the community. So here's analysis of the flood damage prevention ordinance amendments, proposing a number of changes. The first one, which is mandated by FEMA, is to adopt the new flood insurance rate maps. They recently underwent a mapping effort to more accurately map coastal flood zones, and these new maps were a part of that effort to do so. So the appeal period for the maps themselves is now over, and we are required to adopt these new flood insurance rate maps by October 18th, or we would be suspended from the National Flood Insurance Program. So just a summary of some of the physical map changes from what is effective now to what they had preliminarily mapped in 2016. As you can see, there is actually a reduction in the amount of structures in the flood zone by 23%. So it seems that the The flood zone has shrunken a little bit. In some areas, you do see that the predicted elevations have gone up, but due to the more accurate measuring techniques, we've actually seen a reduction in the amount of structures that would be federally required to purchase flood insurance. The second goal is to increase the clarity and enforceability of the language in the ordinance, adding new definitions, replacing definitions, adding more detail in various sections, and adding sections on accessory structures and garages. Overall, the goal is to make the ordinance more enforceable, more clear, easier to read, easier to administer, and to make the information in there more clear for everybody who is consulting that. The third change is floodproofing requirements for non-residential buildings. Currently, the way our ordinance is written, we do not require commercial floodproofing to have freeboard, so we don't require them to floodproof up above the base flood elevation. Currently, we do have a 1-foot freeboard, so we want to change that language at a minimum to reflect the freeboard that we have in the rest of the community. I think this was maybe just an error in the way that it was written originally. But this would make the floodproofing requirements for commercial buildings congruent with what we require for elevating residential structures. So adding a section for violations, just to clearly define what violations are, what the penalties are. As you know, it can be hard to enforce things, and just having a very clear understanding of what the rules are, what the penalties are, and how to go about that just really helps administer the ordinance. Another change is to amend the definition of substantial improvements and damages to be counted cumulatively over a 5-year period. Currently, substantial improvements are calculated on a per project basis, and counting them cumulatively over a 5-year period would count every improvement made to that structure over a 5-year period as one determination of whether or not it's a substantial improvement. So substantial improvements, if you do have a structure and you invest over, another thing we're proposing is to change the threshold from 50% to 49%. If you own a home and you invest a certain amount of money into the structure and your home is not currently built to what the current floodplain standards are, you would be required to go up to what the floodplain standards are. And what this does is this prevents people from investing a lot of money into their homes without necessarily taking into consideration the safety factors and what the current planning and floodplain regulations are. So this is typically an issue on older homes that people are remodeling, or homes that have been damaged by a flood or fire or any type of disaster situation in which people want to repair that home. So changing the threshold from 50 to 49, and both of these are also eligible for CRS points. Here's a diagram for substantial improvements. It's just kind of a little example to make it more clear. Here's just any old house. And this is just taken from a random home in the flood zone. So whenever we do a substantial improvements, we go by the improvement value of the home, not by the total market value. So it's calculated as a percentage of the overall improvement value. So in this example, if this home was doing a renovation, say it was just an interior remodel, a little bit of exterior rehabilitation, and the investment to the structure was over $100,519 over a 5-year period under the new definition, this would be counted as a substantial improvement. So if you look over here, the actual improvement value of the home is $205,000. That's the value of the structure. So the value of the improvements would have to be at least 49%. So under the current rule, you could make this investment year after year without having come into the floodplain code. So now with a 50% that we currently have, you could invest up to 49% of the value of the home each successive year if you wanted to. And that has implications when people try to phase different projects, which isn't very common, but it is common for people to, say, do one project this year, do another project the next year. Next thing you know, you've rebuilt the entire home without coming into compliance with the floodplain code. So it prevents that. And then also improvement records run with the property and not the homeowner. So those substantial improvement calculations are based on improvements that are done to the structure, and no matter what, if someone sells that home, it's tracked through the building itself. Another one is to increase the freeboard to 2 feet in all special flood hazard areas. Currently, we have a freeboard of 1 foot in all special flood hazard areas. If you see here, this is just a representation of what the base flood elevation would be, and this home is built right to where the base flood elevation is. If you see down here in this picture, this is an example of what the freeboard is. It's essentially a margin of safety between what your predicted or modeled flood is and what the real world circumstances are. You know, whenever they map the flood heights and the flood zone, it's really just a computer model, and the reality is not always exactly the same as the model. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. You know, increasingly over the years, it's been, you know, we've had a lot of serious floods around the country, and it's been more than expected, but that doesn't always happen. Freeboard is just meant to give an extra factor of safety. So we're proposing to raise that from 1 foot up to 2 foot. And here is a table that shows the different freeboards for other various communities around Oregon. Another proposed amendment is balance, cut, and fill. At the moment, there is no prohibition to adding fill into the flood zone. It's a common way that people want to elevate their home instead of structurally elevating it, like on a higher foundation. And the big downside is that the net impact of people filling on their property, you're essentially adding material into the flood zone, which decreases the storage capacity. And the issue is that it can potentially, if you fill your house in your property and raise it up, it has the impact of pushing that flood water onto your neighbor, onto other properties within the flood zone. And on a cumulative level, if it happens a lot, you could actually raise the overall flood height in the flood zone itself. So, you know, an example people often use is like putting a brick in a bathtub, or, you know, in the top of your toilet tank. You're taking up that storage capacity, and the water level goes up. This amendment would require that any fill added would have to be balanced with an equal amount of cut to maintain the compensatory storage within the flood zone. Last one is prohibiting enclosures over 300 square feet on elevated buildings in VE zones. VE zones are wave action zones that are the most susceptible to wave action. And large enclosures underneath buildings have they use what are called breakaway walls, which are designed to break away in the event of a flood. But often what happens is the wall will break away, but it's still a floating wall. And so then that wall ends up being incorporated into the flood, and it ends up being more debris. And it also carries, if you have an enclosure over 300 feet, it increases your insurance premium significantly. So this is also eligible for CRS points as well. That's it.
Questions? Anyone?
I
Steve?
had one comment on packet page 60 for replacement manufactured dwellings. The finished floor needs to be elevated a minimum of 18 inches instead of 2 feet. Everything else is 2 feet. Is this correct, or is this need to be corrected?
I would have to look at that and
Yeah,
see.
it's on packet page 60B at the very bottom of the page.
You mind if I don't have my packet in front of me at the moment.
Yeah,
Oh, it's on your computer.
it's on my computer.
Yeah, I can take a look and get back to you on that. If anything, the manufactured home should at least be minimum equal to what a stick-built home is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, traditionally, it's measured a little bit differently as to what the lowest floor is, but the goal is to have it at least at the same. They shouldn't be, so.
And then I had one other question. Could you give me an example of a non-structural flood proofing? What is an example of that? Or what could be?
Non-structural flood proofing, or, well, there's different types of flood proofing. You know, a structural floodproofing would be something where the structure is designed to physically keep the water out of a building. And it's designed to actually take the pressure of the water, both from the buoyancy and the dynamic forces of the water. And non-structural floodproofing would be to, there are certain types of floodproofing where, you're sealing your utilities from floodwaters entering, and it's not necessarily a structural component of the building, but there are certain things like plumbing and electrical systems which you also do need to floodproof, which would fall into non-structural. It's not part of the main structure of the building.
Got it. Thank
Or you can make things resistant to flood damage.
Other questions? So I just want a clarification. There isn't any requirement in this to retrofit existing structures, either commercial or residential, until they hit that greater than 49% of,
Currently, it's 50%, but
Okay.
the way it's calculated is per each single project.
right, right. But there isn't any requirement to retrofit a building unless you want to make changes to it, essentially.
Correct. Yeah, there's no requirement for anybody to come into compliance with any flood-related code requirements unless they invest that money into it, unless they are doing a substantial improvement.
So if somebody currently has flood insurance, the adoption of this particular ordinance, will that impact their flood insurance premium?
It wouldn't impact someone's flood insurance premium, aside from the maps, which we have to adopt. That would affect maybe a single homeowner's flood insurance premiums if they were formerly not in a flood zone and now they're mapped into a flood zone. They could be required to now purchase flood insurance. And in some of the areas on the map, I think from what that table shows, we saw a decrease in the amount of homes that were in the flood hazard zone, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some people brought into the flood hazard zone that weren't previously.
Okay, but adopting these maps could result in some people not having to have flood insurance anymore because they're no longer in the flood?
Correct. And yeah, the actual ordinance in terms of the stronger development standards is not going to affect somebody's flood insurance who currently has a home that was built. It's going to affect, hopefully it will lower flood insurance premiums with our CRS community membership. Going forward with that will hopefully lower everybody's insurance premiums, but it really is on a case-by-case basis in terms of the insurance is done through FEMA and it's done by their maps. We as a community can have higher standards than FEMA, which is what the state of Oregon elects to do and what we've elected so far to do. But the insurance is actually through FEMA and from their mapping. So it's kind of hard to give you an exact answer.
Okay,
But
that's all right, I understand. Marie?
How are people notified if they're now in flood zone?
well, they would be notified by their insurance agent who does their homeowner's insurance. We will also be likely be sending out some outreach materials that would notify people who are in a flood zone. But anybody who has a federally backed mortgage who is in the flood zone would be required to purchase that.
If they're new to the flood zone, are we notifying them, or is FEMA notifying them?
I would say both. We haven't done that outreach yet. We haven't adopted the maps yet. So once we're further along in that process, we'll most likely be sending out letters to people, and I would assume that FEMA and their flood insurance provider will be sending that out as well. And we also have outreach materials in the back on the table if anybody's interested. It talks about grandfathering your insurance rates. There's a couple pamphlets on lowering your insurance premiums and some other good stuff if anybody's interested.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Weston. Oh, one more.
I'm going to make it, for instance, if you were in a flood zone and they moved you out of the flood zone, okay, with the mapping, can you still buy the insurance, or are you excluded from the insurance?
You can still buy the insurance. That would be an example where your insurance would likely fall drastically.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be mandatorily required to purchase it as a condition of your mortgage, but you would be allowed to buy what's called a preferred risk policy.
Okay, and that would, yeah, I'm just supposing if somebody was to get flooded and they didn't have the insurance because they got moved out of the zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend if you're close to a flood zone, you can buy flood insurance, and it's
Lot better
definitely,
rate.
yeah, for definitely a much reduced rate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Weston. Anybody in the audience want to speak on this topic? Nope. Okay. I don't see any public agency representatives here, so if there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
I move that we close the record and the public hearing on ZOA 2019-05.
I second it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public record is closed. What's the pleasure of the commission?
I move that we recommend, the flood maps and associated flood prevention ordinance amendments, which is ZOA 2019-05.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. We will get a final recommendation prepared. The City Council will hold a public hearing on this matter on Monday, August 12th. It's going to be a busy meeting for them. Okay. Dock permitting and standards. It is now 7:07. The public hearing for file ZOA 2019-06 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning in Chapter 17.44 Marine Waterway, Section 17.44.040 Standards, to make referenced standards for docks applicable in all zones where docks are permitted by conditional use. This ordinance establishes docks as conditional uses in the GC, RC, TVC, OSP, RM, RC, and R1 zones. I'm sure you all know what all of those are. And establishes dock standards. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. We're going to cover some preliminary matters. You know the drill here. Does any member of the commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Okay.
Just point of clarification. I'm the district manager for the Devils Lake Water Improvement District. The district, nor myself, does not own property on the lake, but just information.
Okay. Sure.
I don't see any conflict, but thanks for the disclosure.
Thank you. Okay. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of the hearing. You don't have a conflict of interest, do you, Steve? Okay. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff, and if the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any question will not be counted in your time limit. Will the staff please present their report? you want to hit the slideshow button? Or you like to do it that way?
No, what is it?
Up on the top,
Or down
There's-
on the bottom.
yeah, or down on the bottom. Up
Right
on
next to the
top, it
90%.
says
Slideshow?
Yeah. From current slide, click there.
Okay. I was going to ask Weston how he did that. Anne Marie Skinner, Senior Planner for the City of Lincoln City. And this is the Zoning Code Amendment ZOA 2019-06. So by way of background, Devil's Lake is not zoned. It is a body of water, and it is not in a zoning district. Use zone for docks, then, is based on the zone of the land to which the dock is attached. Our current code in Chapter 17.44 outlines current dock standards, and that is, those dock standards are somewhat limited. They don't give a lot of specifics, and they don't specifically, they do not include the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife recommended standards for docks. And additionally, they only allow docks in the marine waterway zone. And there are a number of zones in the city limits around Devil's Lake that are not marine waterway. In an intergovernmental
Say that again.
there are a number of zones or zoning districts
Okay,
adjacent to Devil's Lake
right.
that are not zoned marine waterway.
Okay,
In fact, most of them.
okay.
So as it stands right now, our current code only allows docks by code in the marine waterway zone.
Okay, all right, thank you for that.
There was an intergovernmental agreement entered into March 12, 2018 between Lincoln County and Lincoln City, wherein it was stated that the county has authority to permit and approve dock structures outside the city limits, and the city has authority to permit and approve building and structures in the city limits, including structures landward of the shoreline, and that there is a need to formally clarify and allocate jurisdiction to the city to review dock structures in the interim while the UGMA is finalized. Currently, our code doesn't have anything in place for us to be able to allow permitting of docks in city limits, and that is what this code amendment will do. It is allow those folks who own property adjacent to Devil's Lake to be able to have a mechanism by which they can apply for a dock. So, as I just said, the purpose of this ordinance amendment is to provide dock standards so that those folks who want to build a dock have some guidelines and know what type of materials, the size, the spacing, etc. And then we are adding docks as a conditional use to those zoning districts that are adjacent to the lake or Schooner Creek or Siletz. There's a very small portion of Siletz Bay that's in the Taft Village Core. And so we have added the Taft Village Core zoning district as one of the zones that would allow docks with a conditional use permit approval. So the draft ordinance expands the current dock standards in Chapter 17.44 to include the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife standards, and those standards are verbatim So what you see in the proposed ordinance is exactly what ODF&W recommends in their standards. And then we are adding docks as a conditional use in those zones adjacent to the lake and Schooner Creek. And those zones are R1, which is a single-family residential, multiple family residential, RM, recreation commercial, which is RC, GC is general commercial, open space, OS, P is parks, and TVC is the Taft Village Core. And as you know, but for edification of the public, conditional use requires a public hearing with the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission would hear the application and review it. And this provides the permitting mechanism for those other zones other than marine waterway. And with that, I will stand for question or sit for questions.
Questions?
I thought these docks were granted by the Marine Board, and when I owned a dock, I paid a fee, and then the second 5-year period, they required that I send them a sketch of the dock, which I did, and the price went up on the fee, and so I'm concerned that Lincoln City is going to charge for the docks on top of the new requirements, or what is your plan for implementing this ordinance?
Well, in order to be able to have permission to build the dock, they need land use approval. And the land use approval is the conditional use. And once they have conditional use permit approval, I mean, the only fee associated with that would be the fee for the conditional use application. There won't be any additional fees that would be paid to Lincoln City.
Are there fees that would be paid to the county?
No.
Okay.
So there's just the Marine Board fee for having a dock, I guess, is what you're saying?
I'm not aware of that. That would be something I would have to look into.
So, Anne Marie, I know a little bit about that. I think what you're referring to, Miles, is licensing a dock because the lake is waters of the state. So you have to get a license to put a dock on the lake through, I think it's through the Department of State Lands, but it might be the Marine Board. Pardon?
I'm sure
It's not a lease, it's a license. I know that the city has to do it for the dock at Regatta Park and the little dock we have at the end of Tide, but anyone with a structure on the lake, whether it's a retaining wall, a dock, whatever it might be, they do have to get, I think it's a 5-year license through I thought it was the Department of State Lands, but that's just to use to have something in the water that you don't actually own, the water. And Anne Marie's talking about the land use approval to build the structure.
Yeah, two separate things, kind of akin to a business license versus a building permit for the building for the business. You know, two completely different.
Okay, so someone would come to the Planning Commission and present their plan and need a conditional use permit to do that, and that would require a fee to be paid to file that request for a conditional use permit.
Right, the application fee.
Then they build their dock, and they need to get permission from state lands in the form of a license to have the dock.
Right, and then part of that license document has a section on it that requires the city or county, whoever it might be, to sign on it saying that it's a land use compatibility statement, saying this thing that this property owner has or wants to have is approved by the city or the county, and it meets the city or county's land use requirements.
Did the county use the ODF and W standards for dock construction? Or is that new?
I don't know. I'd have to look at
The county standards are based upon the Fish and Wildlife standards for their municipal code development.
All right. And are there any federal regulations related to constructing in the state
And-
waterways?
My words here. Not in Devil's Lake that I'm aware of.
How about in Silence Bay?
In Slets Bay?
Yeah.
I would assume so, as it is part of a federally recognized tributary system, that there would be some federal standards for that.
So we're not talking about
I,
docks into the ocean, right?
Yeah, it's, well, into the bay, over salt water, yeah.
Just, you said a small portion of Siletz Bay.
So as we, a few meetings ago, you may recall we were talking about commercial zones. We have, as you go outside of the city down by Cutler, there are very small parcels that are on the east side of 101 that may have some structures over the body of water right there.
East side of 101.
The river.
On the,
By
in the
Schooner
river.
Creek?
By Schooner Creek?
Schooner Creek, yes. Yes, near there.
Okay. Any other questions for Anne Marie?
Well, I was just, so we can assume, since the county standards are based on the Fish and Wildlife guidelines, that most of the docks currently on Devil's Lake are in compliance with those standards?
If they received permits through the county, we have not done an analysis to determine which were legally constructed or illegally constructed.
So would there be any requirement that if they're not in compliance, that if any repairs are made, or if the structure needs to be rebuilt, they need to come into compliance?
That would be the case for anyone. You cannot exceed your existing nonconformities. If you're maintaining legally established dock, you would be able to maintain. If you rip out and repair or do significant maintenance, say you need new pilings or you need a new float system, that is a new system, and you would have to come into compliance with our existing standards.
from my brief experience around the
Talk
lake,
into the microphone, please.
I would say that most of the new properties have been updated, and but there aren't the old kind of pilings that they put down with tar and hazardous materials on them. And even my dock is a plastic encapsulated styrofoam thing. But I'm wondering if the older portion of the dock, which runs up the length of the frontage property, and it is wood, I'm confused on that as to whether or not that has to come into compliance also.
No. As it sits right now, if you don't do anything with it, no, it does not have to come into compliance. It would, all existing docks would fall under our non-conforming section of the code, which you can't increase the nonconformity, but if you replace it or if it's damaged, there's a certain percentage that you have to replace. That portion has to be in conformance with the code.
Okay.
But this does not require everyone that has docks to go in and tear out their docks and replace it with one that meets these
But
guidelines.
eventually, they'll have to replace it because it's rotting away and it's not plastic or that type of protective material, I would think.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Anne Marie. Okay, now is the time for public comment. Anybody in the audience wish to speak on this? Nope. Okay. I don't see any public agencies represented. If there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
I move to close the public hearing and the record for ZOA 2019-06 dock permitting standards.
I second.
All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the record and public comment is closed. What's the pleasure of the commission?
I move to recommend to the City Council that it adopt ZOA 2019-06 dock permitting standards.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, this will be forwarded as a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council will hold a public hearing on this matter on Monday, August 12th. All righty. Old business. We have a work study, North Lincoln City mixed use. Gesundheit.
So in your materials today, starting on packet page 98, you should have received just a brief summary of the additional information that we've provided for you this evening, which included the material sent to the DLCD notice, the draft language for the consideration into the comprehensive plan, including the notice to DLCD, and then a map showing the larger North Lincoln City mixed-use land use designation area as it's currently proposed by staff. And this map that is included actually includes all areas within the current village's master plan. And staff does intend to go out and reach out to property owners to authorize if they want to stay at an R175 zoning designation or stay within what has currently been approved under the village's master plan. Those property owners would have that right. It is an optional to jump in for this new land use designation at this time. Beyond the additional information, I really wanted to just give council or commission the opportunity to continue to think about this and talk about this. So staff does not have a detailed presentation to share with you. It really is just a continuation of the discussion from our last meeting as we move forward and prepare for a public hearing.
Okay. Go ahead, you can ask a question.
Would the new mixed-use land zone include open space area that is currently designated open space and is zoned open space?
Okay, so I'm going to start with context, and I'm going to be really clear because I know that land use map designations are new to Lincoln City. Zoning districts are what you apply for when you are building something. A land use is a future designation. So the proposal that we currently have drafted with the large area for the land use designation would allow the zoning districts of open space, which are currently there, to remain. However, this is not a zone change. This is a land use designation change.
So it wouldn't change the use of the open space or the protection of the open space?
Correct. So how it's currently drafted, we're proposing to establish a land use designation for the whole area, keep the zoning as it is right now with R175 and the open space zoning that we have currently. Establish that the intent of the land use designation is to environmentally preserve as well as meet the housing needs of the future in a condensed way. Put your density in a small area, preserve the the thumb, the knoll, the other areas that are out there nearby the Cascade Head Preserve area. So at this point in time, this land use designation does not change any zoning rights that anybody has under that. A future project that will be coming down is actually establishing implementing zones for that area that would look similar to the map you saw in the last meeting where we had that kind of concentric form.
I have a comment, and I'm going to ask Steve to show me. Can we go to page 99 of the packet? There's a paragraph that's a bit wonky, and I would just like you to maybe fix the language. Okay, stop. So it's a paragraph toward the bottom of the packet, page 99, and it says, a district where wetlands, streams, and their corridors are preserved, improved, and dedicated on wetland wildlife corridors with conservation easement, blah, blah, blah. Something's missing. I don't know if it's a verb.
It looks like a
that's
few
missing or-
commas and
There's something, I have a hard time reading that paragraph and understanding what you're trying to say.
Yeah, so this actually came from some of the draft language out of the Villages Master Plan revision. The intent on the land use district, I should say the land use designation, would be that while we, as the city, are majority property owners in the area, it is our prime time to invest in preserving some of that wetlands, streams and their corridors, and also improving them maybe before or at the time of establishing some of the zoning standards. So coming from Washington State, where we have my last 12 years of planning experience is focused around what we call SEPA. It's the State Environmental Protection Act. Some of you from California, if you are, may understand NEPA. Somehow Oregon or CEQA, yes. And then we have federally NEPA. Oregon doesn't have a similar act. And one of the things that I'm used to in land use planning is that all critically sensitive areas must be preserved. That includes wetlands, that includes streams, and at minimum at least a 25 to 50-foot buffer from those areas so that we don't have pollutants running into it, right, people running through it, development occurring within it. And so what I'm proposing for the community, the commission, and the councilors to consider is this area a good spot, as we are the property owners, to look at preserving the sensitive ecological functions of it at this time.
Sure. And I have no qualms with what I think that paragraph says.
Oh,
I
it
just
completely
want it
can be
to
rewritten.
a little bit clearer, and I would like you to include in that, in terms of natural functions, the concept of wildlife corridors.
Yeah.
Because I would not want to see things preserved as tiny little islands that don't function ecologically for the species. I've seen that, been there. So
Yeah.
if you could just include that language in some form in that paragraph.
And that's a safety issue also. Having corridors keeps deer will encourage deer to remain in the corridor instead
And
of-
eat native vegetation and not my flowers.
Well, that isn't going to happen. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
What were the funds that, there was like a main bowl of funds that we used to purchase this at the time that we bought it from?
Oh, I'm not sure. I would have to get back to that. I don't know what the city paid to purchase the 300 or something acres.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure that we are able to return that money to whatever that use is somehow with this property too.
Oh, you're saying be cognizant that we find the balance between preservation and development opportunities. And that makes very much sense.
Mr. Apicello, do you know where the funding came from to purchase the village's property?
Sure. A portion of it came from the open space funds, and a portion of it came from, it was low-income housing fund, and then some from the general fund, so.
So were there any strings attached to that money in terms of reimbursing, particularly the low-income fund, or?
Yeah, the low-income fund will either use a portion of the property for affordable housing, or we will restore that money to that fund if we sell a portion of the property.
Okay.
The open space was kind of addressed when we rezoned the knoll to, I don't know how many acres it was, but to open space.
Does that answer your question, Gary?
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit. Due to the fact that that money that was used for low-income housing fund was taken off the board for a long period of time, I would like to make sure that this property does in fact get used somewhat to provide that kind of housing.
Yeah, so what the proposal for staff is we're not reducing the capacity of the land. We're just looking at proposing the capacity be more
Adequately used.
densely used, yeah,
I
instead of a sprawling approach.
I think that would certainly fit low-income housing, because you're going to need some density to make that work financially. So I'm just trying to keep the eye on the ball. You know, the people that paid for it should be benefited for it.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? I appreciate you moving us into the current century in terms of long-range planning for the city.
I look forward to bringing many more items in front of you.
Right. I don't think there are any other comments or questions on it, so well done. Design standards.
Yeah, so in addition, similar, this is actually this was more of just following up with the additional information you requested at the meeting, but I might have given you a little more data than some of you really wanted or understood. So I know that specifically, as a commission, you had requested me to find out how many single-family homes versus multifamily units were built in the RM zoning district since, say, the last 5 years. Well, what I was able to do a little quicker was determine how many we have in the whole city through the RM zone. And when I pulled out the land use codes with the help of our GIS analyst, I specifically stuck with the multifamily and residential condominium zones codes. And these codes are what the tax assessor uses to determine your taxes for your property on site. The what we see here is that we have out of about 10,000, or I'm sorry, out of 1,000 tax lots, 66% of those are improved residential properties, and that's single-family homes.
66% in the mixed use
No, in the
No.
in the multifamily
Multifamily.
residential.
are, so
So
two-thirds.
2/3 are using it as single
Single
family. Now, what I also found out, and I gave you two different tables, one with the details and one with a quick, short summary synopsis. I sorted the details by the P class, which is property class. Sorry, more acronyms for you guys, but the majority of the homes in the residential medium dense, in the multifamily residential zone were constructed prior to the majority of them were all constructed prior to well, 1984 or 1985. Since the zone went into effect in 1985, there is probably about 100 single-family homes that have gone into the residential medium. I could give you more than an about number once I get back to my actual Excel table. I'm not sure what the reasoning for designating it as multifamily residential in that area, or in the areas through town. There definitely are some parts of town that validate potentially going out and asking the neighbors if they want to become a single-family residential district. Specifically, I think of right on the east side of Ocean Lake. We have a lot of older historic homes on small lots in that area that in the last 60 years we haven't seen redevelopment, let alone in the last 35 years since it's been zoned multifamily, that maybe that designation was just not realistic due to the subdivision that had already occurred in some of these areas. The other thing is that I don't have a total unit count of multifamily units, but we do have a decent amount of multifamily structures within the residential medium zone. However, some of those are also condominiums. So you have attached single family, which would be considered a multifamily structure, but it's fee simple ownership under a condominium agreement. We have 203 of those 1,000 tax parcels are vacant land still. So there is availability for some development, but what we've seen, we have had some inquiries coming into the department. The majority of those, either the sewer's not right next to it right away, they're a little further out, or they have some topography or critical area encumbrances that might make it a little difficult to meet the density needs for a project like that. So the reason that this was asked by the commission was because in the draft recommendations for the design standards, specifically for the residential RM zone, it is recommended, staff has proposed to go to a minimum density of 25 units per acre. Running a rough calculation of what that would mean for, say, an average 5,000 square foot lot that was subdivided back in the 50s or 60s. That would require a triplex. Let me see here. It ultimately, at a minimum density of 25 units per acre, that would require that you have a lot of at least 1,742 square feet. If you had a lot of 5,226 square feet, you could get a triplex. If you had a lot of 5,000 square feet even, you'd be mandated, you'd be required to build a duplex on that. So just trying to give some general information on what impacts that could have, that could allow some of these single-family homes that maybe they're not seeing families of 7, 8 kids or even more than 2, to maybe decide they want to convert and establish a duplex unit or an additional unit on with their home. So it will be a big discussion, and staff will provide a little more detailed analysis as we prepare for our presentations and PowerPoints on August 6th. But I did want to come and give you guys some thought fodder on the impacts of this density change. And then thinking ahead with the information in your packet tonight about how much of that residential multifamily zone has been developed as single family development. It's going to take a lot of public outreach and a lot of work once we start going into our comprehensive plan to establish our future land use map and really try to get it right on where do we want the future growth to go. These areas in town may have been designated multifamily residential for 35 years, but if the market's not putting them there, is there a better spot? Or do we create or establish a greater mixed-use allowance for our general commercial and some other incentives if we want to be establishing higher density housing units?
I think there was an interesting article in Sunday's Oregonian about the HB 2001
Yeah.
and how communities that have 10,000 or more in population must allow duplexes in single-family zones, and there's greater density required of communities with 25,000 or more in population. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on Lincoln City, and we're very close, I think, to being at the 10,000 mark.
We'll have our next reports out for next year, but I think we're at about 7,400 at this point for a permanent population. The county and our buildable lands they're not anticipating us to grow fast. But I do agree, and you know, some of the beauty of coming here to Lincoln City and working here is the fact that some of our zones in our single-family zones already allow, we don't mandate, but we do allow duplexes, attached single-family, and even triplexes in some cases. And then, of course, the 4 flats are allowed. But those do take up a larger lot size and require that. But yeah, I saw that article and appreciate you thinking about that, especially as we go forward with this comp plan and truly looking at, without expanding our city size, how can we expand our economy of scales and our housing needs and others, you know, the ecological functions.
I think you hit on it when you mentioned earlier with the section of north part of the town where we protect the natural areas there by increasing density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so we still have the best of both worlds, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
I want to pick up on one other question that Commissioner Cunningham asked, and that was to hear about what is charged for SDCs for the different housing types.
Yes, and I will apologize, Gary. I did not get to catch Stephanie to find out that specific question. I will make sure that is in my PowerPoint.
That's one of the things. I mean,
Yeah.
anything we can think of to try to make affordable housing affordable. I mean, I noticed, I think it might have been in the same article that you were reading. There was a thing about, it broke it down by county and some of the urban areas and how much people are paying in rents, housing costs, and there's a huge disparity in the state. I mean, it's huge. $400 or $500 in some locations was the average, and you can't find one here.
No, yeah, we have special problems on the coast.
And then I just want to follow up on another question from last meeting about the landscaping standards. You were going to, did you intend to provide edits to those things, or was that just informational that you were collecting our thoughts on it? I think Steve suggested several edits about the trees and shrubs and whether they be.
Oh, yes, bringing up the native vegetation
Right.
versus coastal.
Yeah,
Well, let me see where we were at. That was with the design standards.
yeah.
See, I've got a lot of notes on our sign conversation here.
Well, I think that.
It is something that we do have in code preferred planting species that reference our city's handouts. We haven't gone through to analyze and really determine yet how accurate those handouts are. But what I can do is provide for the public hearing what those documents are for the Planning Commission.
Yeah.
And then we can work, if the commission, after you take public testimony, want to make recommendations. I do anticipate, just so the Planning Commission is aware and feels comfortable here, you know, often, like today's public hearings are going to city council in a month from today, August 12th, right? So the design standards public hearing that is scheduled for you guys on August 6th is not scheduled until public hearing with city council until September 23rd. So that gives, I wanted to give plenty of deliberation time because of the breadth of the amendments that it is including after we get public comment.
Yeah, and I didn't want to, no pun intended, I didn't want to get into the weeds. I just wanted to make sure that the intent was there, and that is to maintain the coastal environment
Yeah.
as much as we can, and again, something that we heard pretty loud and clear through the whole visioning process was the importance of the coastal vegetative environment.
Yes.
So that was our intent.
Okay, and I will make sure that that information is in there, and if we need to emphasize it a little more within the code. But that would be coming up after, that would be part of the planning commission draft ordinance that occurs after your guys' deliberation.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on design standard comments? Okay, any new business?
No new business.
All right, no training, I assume?
No training. We did have a commissioner come in and ask if the book is ready. So Josh, we hope that you've been thoroughly enjoying.
Got the book. I've read it twice. I'll bring it back. I almost brought it tonight with me, but I will bring it back.
Read it
or yeah,
twice.
I'll drop it by the. It's not a long book, but it's
a-
very informative.
It's like 60 or 80
Yeah.
pages, yeah.
Okay, I think I'm next. on the
Well,
list.
Marie came in and asked first, so.
it gives you a great basis of information for responsibilities and roles. And very
Oh, well, then
informative.
never mind, I don't want to.
You got that.
Okay, reports and comments. I think you had,
Yeah, I actually
With
said it was going to
Sean.
be under item number 10, but
Oh,
it is with
okay.
dear sadness that I did receive today verbal resignation from our fellow Commissioner Sean Kerr. It's with happiness I get to say that his business is booming, but the balance of the dedication necessary to fulfill the duties, he felt that it would be a better service to provide the city to step down and let someone else come in at this point in time. So once we receive formal letter from him, which I anticipate getting via email, I will share that with our city clerk, and then we'll go out for an advertisement for the open position that would complete out his term, which I believe was current until 2021.
well, I have mixed feelings about that. I'll miss Sean, I'm sad. Do we need to appoint a temporary
Yes.
vice chair? Because he
So
was
what-
our vice chair.
He is our vice chair. What I would request is that he was planning on chairing the special meeting that is scheduled for the 30th of this month, which is at 6 p.m. You guys will be the VRD Board of Appeals at 6:30, or at the conclusion of that 6 p.m. meeting, you will become the Planning Commission board who hears appeals. So I was going to request if Commissioner Griffiths would be willing to sit in as chair for that meeting, and potentially the August 6th meeting. I also understand that we have excused absences from Chair Crone. You will not be able to make the 30th meeting. Okay. As long as Josh, Miles, Marie, and Steve will be here, that will not create a quorum issue.
I will ensure I have a backup boat on standby.
Okay.
When would be the first opportunity to elect a new vice chair then? Would that be at the first August meeting, or?
We could do it at the 1st of August, or we could, the first meeting in August, or we could look at doing it at our second meeting in August. We have canceled our September 3rd meeting as per our last meeting discussion.
My preference would be the 20th.
Do it on the 20th of August, so you can be around, okay.
Is that all right? But you can share those others?
I can share those.
Yay, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Future agenda items? Next
We do
meetings?
have, Kate, I might need an assistance from you on dating remember. We did receive an application for a land use and zoning amendment for a triplex that is on the water, or maybe it's a duplex that's on the water. I think that that is tentatively scheduled for our September, or did we look at?
This is the zone change that we deemed complete.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've scheduled that for sometime in September, I believe. I don't know the exact date.
Let me see here. I may actually have it right here.
I think it's September, what would be the second meeting in September?
Yeah, so we're currently looking at the Planning Commission public hearing date on September 17th for that. So on August 6th packet, we will provide the complete application for your general information, and then provide the staff report and detailed analysis for that September 17th meeting.
Okay.
Actually,
Is that it?
that is it.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.